Ladies and gentlemen, I present a man who has pursued peace for a lifetime, George Shultz.
Thank you, Bill. It's a great honor to be here and to have a presentation from Bishop Swing, somebody who married Charlotte and I. So we are deeply grateful to him. I always remember the little counseling session we had beforehand, and he sort of held our hands and finally said, okay, if you really want to go ahead, go ahead. Charlotte mentioned the occasion with the Russians in Washington recently, and she was asked to put on this dinner, which she described as the National Archives and one thing and another. And Bob Rubin is a member of our group. He's the chairman of the executive committee of Citicorp. And I said, Bob, you didn't know before you volunteered who was going to put on the dinner, did you? No. Well, I don't think, from what I read about Citicorp, that you can afford it. If Charlotte's going to put something on, you want to be sure there's a budget. If there's too much of a budget, she won't do it, because she wants to do it right. And she does these things so well. And she makes hospitality work and achieve important objectives. This peacemaking is tough business. And I worked at it a lot in my career. I can remember one time when I had been in the Middle East for a week and a half or so peddling my stuff, and I was leaving the area, and there was a cartoon in the Jerusalem Post as I was leaving, and it showed me fending off blows. On the ground was a piece of paper that said Shultz peace proposals. And this is an Israeli beating on me. There's a Palestinian beating on me. There's a Jordanian beating on me. And the caption says, well, at least they agree on something. But I've thought a lot about what should you do? How do you go about it? And it led me to think that you have to think about the nature of the problem you're trying to work with. And there is a sense in which you can take the problems of the world and you can put them in two different piles. In one pile are problems that you can solve. And the other pile are problems that are essentially insoluble. So if you say to me as a construction guy, build me a bridge across the bay, that's a problem. And there's things you have to do to get it done. But I can solve that problem. But if you say, produce that construction job in such a way that there are no lost time accidents, and I put up guardrails and I do one thing and another, and I say, okay, I'll solve the problem, you've lost. Because it's all about attitudes. And you have to say to yourself, this is basically an insoluble problem. All you can do is work at it. And if you work at it continuously and creatively, maybe you can produce a workplace with no accidents. So you can solve the problem, but only if you start by saying it's not soluble. You have to work at it and work at it and work at it. And to a certain extent, as I've listened to my friend Bill Swing talk about the United Religion Initiative, but that's the way you're approaching things. You know that there are problems that are, in a sense, inherently insoluble. They just are tough. But you say, we're going to work at it. And just keep working at it and working at it and working at it. And having a meal together and lighting candles together and doing things that maybe are symbolic, but nevertheless bring you into some common space. And after a while, maybe something happens. When I was in office, I was a great, like the Office of Secretary of State, I was a great advocate of what I call gardening. And I thought it was always the most important and underrated and often neglected aspect of diplomacy. And I think we should have a much greater, myself, I think we should have a much greater capacity for diplomacy than we have, in part so that we can do gardening on a global basis. What are we doing about that? We all know that if you plant a garden and you go away for 6 months and you come back, there aren't any flowers, there are only weeds. And when you pull out the weeds, what's left of the flowers aren't there. So you learn, if you're a gardener, that you come regularly, frequently, and you get out the weeds while they're small. And if you do that, all of a sudden you come back and there's a wonderful flower back there. Well, the same thing is true in diplomacy. If all you do is go someplace or talk to somebody when there's some big problem and you want them to do something or other, you have difficulties. But if you will garden, if you go when there isn't any big problem, and say, let's have an agenda, let's think about what the possible opportunities are for us, what the possible problems are, and let's talk this agenda through, and let's meet frequently. And we have an agenda, we can assign it out. We can have staff work done on these different subjects. And we work at it, we garden. And then when some big issue comes along, well, you created a personal understanding. And I recognize that personal relationships don't solve the big problems of the world, but it doesn't hurt any. And at least what it means is you don't have unnecessary problems. People aren't creating a problem for the sake of creating it. So I think that gardening is an essential function to trying to create a more peaceful world, a world with a greater sense of understanding of what's going on, why you think this and I think that, and how we can get along given those things. And so when I first heard about the United Religious Initiative from Bill Swing, and as I've watched over the years, as I thought about our current major issue of radical Islam using the weapon of terror, and personally, I look at these things that people do, and they say the suicide bombers are motivated by religion, and I really scratch my head and I say, I really don't quite believe it. But anyway, that's what people say. But at any rate, it's a huge problem for us. And here is an organization that's putting people from all the different religions in the world together and doing it in a manner that's respectful of the religious traditions and differences. And bringing people together in a constructive way. It seems to me, if anything has a real chance to make a contribution, this is the sort of thing that the URI is what can do it. So, all of you who are heavily involved in devoting your lives to this, I express to you my deep gratitude for what you're doing. And I think all of us can feel comfortable that this effort is going forward and feel privileged to do whatever we can to to help it along.